I still remember the look in her eyes the first time she stepped onto my porch. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something far more unsettling, a quiet emptiness that belonged to someone who had already stopped expecting kindness. She looked around the small ranch as if it were a prison, dropped her expensive suitcase onto the wooden floor, and with a voice so cold it almost sounded rehearsed, she told me that her father had sent her there as punishment. I had no idea that the next few months would destroy everything I believed about wealth, family, and forgiveness, or that the girl who couldn't wait to leave would one day beg for the chance to stay. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. I had spent most of my life believing that honest work could fix almost anything. My name was Rowan Mercer, and after serving 4 years in the military, I returned to the small farming community where I had grown up. My parents had passed away within 2 years of each other, leaving me their aging horse ranch, a weathered farmhouse, and enough debt to make most people walk away. But every sunrise over those fields reminded me why I stayed. There was peace in feeding horses before breakfast, repairing fences under the afternoon sun, and ending each day knowing that every dollar I earned came from sweat instead of shortcuts. Life was predictable until the morning a black luxury SUV rolled slowly down the dusty road toward my property. It looked absurd against the backdrop of old barns and grazing horses. A sharply dressed driver stepped out first, followed by a teenage girl wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my pickup truck. She looked no older than 19. Her perfectly styled hair couldn't hide the resentment in her expression. The driver handed me a sealed envelope before loading her luggage onto my porch. Inside was a check large enough to cover every debt I owed and a handwritten letter from a billionaire named Victor Ashford. He explained that his daughter, Elena, had become impossible to control. She had been expelled from 2 private colleges, embarrassed the family with reckless behavior, and publicly declared that money solved every problem. As punishment, she would spend the summer working on my ranch. She would receive no luxury, no servants, and no special treatment. If I accepted, the money was mine whether she completed the summer or not. I looked back toward Elena. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pleading. She simply stared at her phone until she realized there was no signal. For the first time, genuine panic crossed her face. She muttered that her father hated her and had dumped her in the middle of nowhere to teach her some ridiculous lesson. I told her that around here, everyone worked before they complained. She laughed. That laugh disappeared before the end of the first day. By noon she had blisters on both hands after trying to carry feed buckets. She complained about the heat, the dirt, the smell of horses, the insects, and the complete absence of internet service. She declared that no normal human being lived this way. I simply handed her another bucket. Every evening she collapsed into the porch swing completely exhausted. Every morning she woke up determined to argue. Yet each sunrise I noticed tiny changes. Her complaints became shorter. She learned the horses' names. She started greeting the elderly neighbors who brought homemade pies and fresh vegetables without expecting anything in return. One afternoon she asked why everyone in town smiled so much even though nobody seemed rich. I answered that maybe they were richer than she realized. She rolled her eyes, but she didn't argue. A week later she accidentally witnessed something she couldn't understand. Mrs. Holloway, an 80-year-old widow, arrived with fresh bread because she had heard I injured my shoulder repairing a fence. She refused payment. Before leaving, she quietly tucked an envelope into my mailbox. Later I discovered $50 inside with a note saying it was for horse medicine. Elena watched silently. She asked why an old woman with almost nothing would give away money. I told her that generosity wasn't measured by bank accounts. That answer seemed to haunt her. As the weeks passed, Elena slowly began discovering parts of herself that expensive vacations had never revealed. She laughed while bottle feeding an orphaned foal. She helped repair broken stalls. She learned to drive my rusty tractor even though she nearly crashed it into a hay bale on her first attempt. For the first time in years, she smiled without pretending. Then one afternoon everything changed. A television crew pulled into town. Reporters surrounded the ranch asking questions about Victor Ashford's rebellious daughter living among farmers. Someone had leaked photographs of Elena covered in mud while working beside me. Social media exploded. Millions mocked the billionaire's daughter for becoming a ranch hand. I expected her to run. Instead, she quietly walked back inside the barn. That evening I found her sitting beside the oldest horse on the ranch with tears running silently down her face. She confessed that she wasn't embarrassed because people laughed at her. She was embarrassed because for the first time in her life she realized she had never actually earned anyone's respect. That confession changed everything between us. The next morning she worked harder than anyone else. Not because she wanted to prove something to the internet. Because she wanted to prove something to herself. As summer continued, our friendship deepened. She asked about my parents. I showed her my mother's recipe book stained with years of cooking. She admitted she couldn't remember the last family meal she had shared with her father. Most dinners had been business meetings. Most birthdays had been expensive gifts delivered by assistants. Most apologies had come in the form of larger credit card limits. Money had replaced affection. Luxury had replaced presence. The loneliness behind her eyes suddenly made sense. One afternoon while cleaning the attic, we found dozens of old family photographs. She spent hours looking through them, smiling at faces she'd never met. Then she quietly asked me what it felt like to have parents who actually knew you. I couldn't answer. Because by then, I realized she wasn't asking about my parents. She was grieving the relationship she never had. A few days later, Victor Ashford unexpectedly arrived. His helicopter landed in a nearby field, sending dust swirling across the ranch. He walked toward us wearing an expensive suit completely out of place among horses and hay. He barely looked at me. Instead he told Elena that the experiment was over. The car was waiting. Their family reputation had recovered. She could come home. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she quietly replied that she wasn't ready. Victor stared at her as if he had misunderstood. She explained that this was the first place where people spoke to her instead of her last name. The first place where mistakes weren't covered with money. The first place that actually felt like home. His face hardened. He accused me of manipulating her. He offered to buy my ranch for 5 times its value if I disappeared from her life. The offer stunned everyone. I looked at the fields my parents had loved. I looked at Elena. Then I handed him the unopened contract. I told him that some things weren't for sale. He left furious. Within days everything began falling apart. Anonymous inspectors suddenly arrived claiming there were permit violations. My bank unexpectedly demanded immediate repayment on an old loan. Suppliers cancelled long-standing agreements without explanation. Rumors spread that my ranch would close. I knew exactly who had the power to make all of it happen. I never told Elena. She eventually found out anyway. She confronted her father. Instead of denying it, he admitted everything. He believed I was taking advantage of her kindness. He believed ordinary people always wanted something from wealthy families. That conversation shattered her. She returned to the ranch completely broken. For the first time since she'd arrived, she apologized for the damage her family had caused. I told her none of it was her fault. She cried harder. The following week became the darkest period of my life. Without suppliers, I couldn't afford feed. Without financing, I couldn't keep every horse. I quietly began preparing to sell animals that had been with my family for years. Elena noticed. She disappeared one afternoon without telling anyone. I feared she'd gone back to the city. Instead she returned carrying only a backpack. She had sold every designer handbag, every piece of expensive jewelry, every luxury watch she owned. She placed the money on my kitchen table. She said that none of those things had ever made her happy anyway. I refused to take it. She insisted that for the first time she actually understood what money was supposed to do. Not buy people. Help people. Word spread throughout town. Neighbors arrived carrying feed, tools, fencing supplies, and volunteers. People I'd helped years earlier came back without being asked. Within 3 days the ranch looked alive again. Watching strangers protect a place they loved broke something inside Elena. She whispered that her father had spent billions building companies but had never built a community like this. The story eventually reached national news. Not because of scandal. Because thousands of people were inspired by a wealthy young woman who chose compassion over privilege. Public opinion shifted dramatically. Victor Ashford's board of directors began questioning his actions. Investors criticized the campaign against a veteran-owned family ranch. For the first time in decades, Victor found himself unable to solve a problem with money. Several weeks later he returned alone. No helicopters. No lawyers. No security. Just a father who suddenly looked much older than before. He asked if we could walk. As we crossed the fields, he admitted something he had hidden for years. After Elena's mother died, he buried himself in work because it hurt less than grieving. Every promotion, every company acquisition, every billion-dollar success had become another excuse to avoid being the father his daughter needed. By the time he realized she was slipping away, he no longer knew how to reach her. Sending her to the ranch had never really been punishment. It had been desperation. He had hoped someone could teach her the values he no longer knew how to give. When he finished speaking, there were tears in his eyes. Not dramatic tears. Quiet ones. The kind that appear only after years of regret. Elena listened without interrupting. Then she hugged him. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't magical. It was simply the first honest embrace they had shared since she was a little girl. Sometimes healing begins with nothing more than the courage to admit you've failed someone you love. As autumn approached, Victor offered to invest in the ranch without expecting ownership. I accepted only after making one condition. He would spend one weekend every month working beside us. No assistants. No business calls. No exceptions. To my surprise, he agreed. The first weekend was awkward. He struggled to shovel stalls. He couldn't saddle a horse. He ruined an entire stack of hay bales. Everyone laughed. Including him. Slowly, laughter replaced silence. Meals replaced meetings. Conversations replaced transactions. Months passed. The ranch expanded. Young people from difficult backgrounds came to learn responsibility, confidence, and hope through caring for animals. Victor quietly funded scholarships without putting his name on anything. Elena decided not to return to the glamorous life everyone expected. She enrolled in veterinary school instead. The girl who had arrived believing the ranch was a prison now called it home. One warm afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after that black SUV first rolled down my driveway, she stood beside the same porch where everything had begun. She smiled at the horses grazing peacefully beneath the bright American sky and admitted that she had once believed her father had sent her there because he wanted to punish her. Looking around at the family she had found, the purpose she had discovered, and the peace she had never known before, she finally understood the truth. Sometimes life sends us exactly where we never wanted to go because that's the only place we'll ever find who we were meant to become. Speech balloon special request: before the story ends, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in this situation? If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more meaningful and inspiring stories. Your support encourages us to keep creating stories that touch hearts around the world. The greatest gift we can ever give another person isn't money, success, or comfort. It's the courage to believe in them when they have forgotten how to believe in themselves. Families can be broken by pride, healed by forgiveness, and transformed by love that asks for nothing in return. No matter how far someone has wandered, kindness always leaves the light on, and sometimes one unexpected second chance becomes the beginning of an entirely new life.